So today we're going to look at how to name your characters, and this is something that I think you can really have fun with, but people get in a surprising tangle about it. So I'm going to show you how to avoid the pitfalls that might be waiting for people that try to name their characters. We're going to look at what makes a memorable character name, and I'm going to show you some successful examples and why I think they work. I'll be giving you tips for the best ways to find names. Where do you look? How do you start? How do you know if you got a good one? So we'll look at those. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you an activity that you can do to really help you come up with the right name for your characters. So stick around, and by the end of this video, you should know where to look, how to find characters, how to have fun with it and not panic about it, and how to choose names that really work for your book and your story. Okay? The first set of tips are about avoiding things. These are things you really shouldn't be doing when you're choosing your character names. The most obvious one, but one that I come across time and again in books that I read, is people choose the same letter to start different characters' names. So if you have a Jane, don't have a Janet. If you have a Bob, don't have a Bert. It's that simple. The names Bob and Bert may sound quite different, but when you look at them, when you're reading it and you see a B, a short name beginning with a B, and another male short name beginning with a B, your little brain, especially when it's tired and you're reading in a hurry, can sometimes muddle them up. And it doesn't take too many goes at muddling up characters for readers to get fed up about it. So don't choose letters that start names that are similar. Another thing to avoid is avoid difficult names. You may love a difficult name, but you don't want your readers to trip up over it. I've had this a lot when I've been writing names for some of my Welsh books. So The Winter Witch is a good example of this. The original character in this, one of the main characters, was called Angharad. And Angharad, if you're not used to Welsh, is quite different. And when I actually heard my editor try and pronounce it, it decided me this wasn't the right name. So she's now called Isolde, which is a fitting name, but it's easier to say. So avoid names that are really hard for people to say. I have actually broken this rule myself with my new book, The Little Shop of Found Things, because my main character in that is called Xanthe, which is not a difficult word to speak. It's the sound of it is not hard, but because it begins with an X, some people might just stumble over it. If you're going to do that, okay, that's fine. It's quite a good idea maybe to back that up with something in the story that shows the pronunciation of the name. So you could have somebody asking for her at the door and saying and pronouncing it wrongly and her correcting them. You could have her having to spell it down the phone and explain it to someone. You can find ways in the story if you're really in love with the name. So be careful about that though. Make sure that the name is not going to trip people up. You want your readers to be going ah and ooh and ah even, but you don't want them going that sort of what's she on about is not something you want from your readers, and it's silly to put in a name that's going to make them go so watch that, okay? No names that are going to trip your readers up. Next thing to avoid is avoid names that people will know for something else. So Diana, Kylie, Kim, they're popular names because they're well known for something else, for somebody else. And those associations are going to be really strong, and you don't want your readers thinking about somebody else when they see the name of one of your important characters. So be careful about that. Don't choose names that are really fashionable, they go out of fashion, or really well known for being somebody else. Avoid names that are chosen for the characteristics of the character. This was very popular in the 19th century. Dickens did it a lot, so did a lot of other people. It doesn't feel right now in the modern age. It's fine if you're writing comedy, if you want to use humour and do that, that's okay. But it really doesn't work otherwise. For example, if you have a character who's quite short, like me, you could call her Jane Small. Okay, that's very on the nose. She's small and she's called Jane Small. Well, how likely is that, to be honest? Is it necessary? You could think you're being clever and call her Jane Big, hysterical. If you want to write a hysterical character, that's fine. Otherwise, avoid it like the plague. So don't use the characteristics of those characters in their names. But be careful. because if you choose a name that happens to be the name of your neighbour or an old school friend or somebody you've completely forgotten about that you met in life, and that's an unsympathetic character, those people are very quick to think that maybe the character was named after them. So don't do that. Okay, so don't use names of people that you know in real life unless you're doing it deliberately, which is a whole other thing altogether. So where do we look for these wonderful names? Okay, well, obvious place is to Google them, and if you put in a list of baby names, you will get hundreds, thousands possibly. So be specific. My advice for that sort of search is baby names, Northern Europe, contemporary. Or if you're doing a historical search, make sure that you pick the right era for those names. You might want to do a geographical search as well. You have to make sure that the names do fit the time and the place that you're writing, obviously. And the internet is very good for that. And you can keep narrowing it down. You might want to get some help with some of them if you've not heard them spoken, but remember that if you feel like that about them and you're researching this, it's your subject, how are your readers going to feel? So maybe best to avoid the ones you're not certain of yourself. Another good resource is a baby book. Before the internet, all writers had baby books on their shelves next to the dictionary and the thesaurus. They're now gathering dust. But they're still quite nice. There's something quite good about flicking through a book that is more serendipitous and you come across names that you might otherwise have missed. A word of warning though, do warn your nearest and dearest, do inform them as to why you are buying a book of baby names, because it's caused alarm in certain households, I'm here to tell you. So just be careful of that, but baby name books, great. Any sort of directories for surnames, if you've got a phone book of some sort, they do still exist. Great for surnames. Look along your bookshelves for surnames, authors, characters. Try and avoid the characters, but the authors, you can use their surnames. Again, try and avoid people that are obvious, people that are going to be known for something else. How then do we make a name memorable? The main thing is that, in fact, it's not the name that makes a character memorable, it's the character. The name becomes memorable because of the character, because of what that character does, because of how they make the reader feel, because we care about them. So you could give your character a very mundane name. For instance, you could call your character Jane, and I can say that because my middle name is Jane. She may be a superhero, she may be the mum of the century, she may be the most successful woman on the planet. She could be all sorts of amazing things with a plain name. If you give your character a really outlandish name, she's got to live up to it. And maybe if you're writing a character that doesn't do anything extremely remarkable, that's going to sound odd anyway. And it's at this point you realise that it's not the name that is memorable, it's the character. The character will infuse that name, however simple and small, with memorable assets and attributes. It works the other way round, which is quite a nice thing to know really, because it frees you up to choose names that people don't have to live up to, that maybe are more fitting for the time that you're writing, for the age of the character, and we'll look at that in a second as well. One of the ways you can make a name more memorable is to attach it to a nickname. This obviously works with comedy, but in everyday life people have nicknames, so although your character may have a main name, they may not even use it. There's a character in my new book, The Little Shop of Found Things, who is called Harley, and he's called Harley because he is a middle-aged motorbike enthusiast who loves Harley motorcycles. And we've lost in time the fact that he has a real name at all, and he's just known by his nickname, and we never really need to know his real name. So you can give characters nicknames if you want to choose something that is more to do with their characteristics or their physical attributes or what they do, then that's okay. Put that in with a nickname and not the character's real name, okay? Another tip here is use a name you like. That connection for you when you're writing, it really helps and it shows through. It's another one of those things about you being in love with your story, you being in love with your characters or in hate with your characters or whatever you want, but feeling something really strong about those characters. Use a name that matters to you because you chose it, because you like it. Even if you think it's a good name for a villain and it's a horrible name, or if you think it's a great name for an elderly person because it reminds you of an elderly person that you knew. Something that works for you. So it's okay to choose names that work for you because it will show through in the way you relate when you're writing. It also helps for those long flat plods through the periods of writing where you think it's going nowhere if you keep coming across a name that works for you. Okay, so choose a name that you like, that matters to you. Be prepared to change. I have got to the end of a second draft of an entire novel and decided that the name wasn't working, and I've changed the name. It's not as difficult as it used to be. You can do a search and find. You can get tripped up, but it does work. So don't be afraid to change. A word here on surnames. Surnames, second names often have parts of the name at least, or even sometimes the whole name, that are things. So I did get very unstuck when I called one of my characters, the surname was Stone. It seemed fine, and eventually, after about halfway through, I realised that this conflicted with another character's name and they were too similar. So I thought, oh well, that's fine, I'll just change that. So I did a search and find for the word stone, as I thought it's the name Stone in my book, and changed it to, I can't remember what it was, Wilson, say. Now that's fine. I suddenly had Wilson walls, somebody being Wilson walled, somebody throwing a Wilson, somebody the colour of a Wilson. Be careful, particularly when you change names that are surnames, because they often do have things in them. So watch out for that one, but don't be afraid to change names if it's not working. Okay? So I wanted to give you one or two examples of names that work. From my own books, I can tell you that this book, The Winter Witch, which as we've talked about, had Welsh names in it. I spent a long time finding names that people could pronounce, and I think that is fairly obvious, but say them out loud. More than that, get other people to read them out loud, and that will help you to be careful about that. So finding successful names, I wanted to show you how I'd come up with a name for Elizabeth in this book. I had to choose a name, obviously, because it's historical fiction, that would fit for the time when she was first given that name, which was 1620 something when she was born. I suppose it's 1619s. So that had to be right. I then needed a name that could change, because she is a character that is almost immortal and lives for many hundreds of years, and needed to disguise her identity and change her name to fit the era she was in. And Elizabeth was a really good name for that, because I had her called Elizabeth, she's called Beth, she's called Elise, she's called Eliza, and that was really helpful. So if you're going to do something clever with your names, or just down complicated, give yourself some scope. Another example of that in this book is there's a puzzle attached to one of the male characters whereby his name is an anagram. He disguises his identity, not terribly obliquely, but he does use the method of using an anagram. So having named him once, I then had to come up with 5 other versions of a complete name for him, first and second, using the letters of his name. And I rather wish I'd thought that out more carefully at the beginning. It was a lesson learned in that one. I think it worked in the end though, so that was okay. One of my favourite names in fiction is actually Magwitch, Abel Magwitch from Great Expectations, a Dickens name. I mean, Dickens did sometimes write a little bit on the nose with his names of characters that fitted their characteristics, but at other times he just found words that sounded right. I mean, the word Magwitch conjures up this frightening, difficult, mysterious character for me, and in fact I called a horse Magwitch years later because the name was so memorable for me and the character that went with it. And sometimes the sound of the word is really important. Make sure you try your names out by speaking them aloud as well as getting other people to say them, because sometimes the sound of them is wrong for the character and the personality of that character. So do try them out aloud, okay? Don't forget when you're choosing a name to make sure it's appropriate for the position in society that your character has. So if they're a servant in 1910, they might have a different sort of name to if they're one of the aristocracy. You can mess about with that. If your character has ambitious parents, she might not be given a lowly servant's name. They might give her a quite highfalutin name. If your character is an aristocratic girl, but her parents don't want her to get ideas above herself, they want her to be a bit more humble and to be more a person of the people, if they're forward-thinking Edwardians maybe, they might give her a very simple name. It's best to play against type rather than to hit the stereotype, okay, so always keep that in mind. You might want to look at the other videos I have on characters while you're developing your characters' names. I've got ones that I will be linking below in the comments and up on the cards here so you can see those. But now I'm going to give you an activity that you can do to help you find your characters' names. The first activity is a character mind map, and there's another video I've done, guess what, on mind maps. That's for general writing using mind maps. For choosing a character name, I suggest that you put a big circle in the middle with the main details about your character. So brainstorm that, but put it all in the middle bubble this time. And then all the things going off that circle are going to be the things that surround her. So the other characters, to make sure you don't trip up and have a name that's too similar. They're going to be the time period that you're writing the book, when it's set. The geographical area that it's set in, all those sorts of things as well, her station in society. You might want to put some significant other characters to her, again, because, you know, if she's going to be constantly in the room with somebody or in scenes with somebody with a particular name, you need to accommodate that. So those sort of little mind maps can help. But the best activity I know for really testing out those names is to write an imaginary scene. So even if you haven't started your book, I'm sure that somewhere in your mind you have some fantastic scenes that you're just itching to write. It might be a big love scene, it could be a big reveal of some information about the character's background or something to do with the mystery in the story. It could be the opening scene, it could be a fight between two characters, an argument or a proper fight. Pick one of those scenes. Pick a scene that you are longing to write when you get further into the book, or one that you've already written if you're now rethinking your characters' names. Pick that scene and try out different names. And it doesn't need to be more than a page or so of writing, but decide on a name. So you're going to use the name Ellie and write that scene with Ellie, and overuse it a bit if you need to. Use it in the Ellie said, Ellie asked, he asked Ellie. Use it in the descriptive passages and the action as well. Ellie walked across the room, Ellie felt about ready to scream, whatever you want to say, but use the name. When you've finished, read it aloud. Listen to how it sounds. How does it feel when you speak it? How does it feel to you to use that name in that situation? And then go back and change the name. Again, easily done, thanks to the wonders of technology, but you could always be writing this in hand and just cross it out with your pen. Put another name in and try that one. And reading aloud does something to really help you see what that name feels like, and you will get a sense of what fits best for the story that you're writing. So in the comments, perhaps you'd like to share with us what your all-time favourite characters' names are. So what characters' names have really stuck with you, and why do you think they work, and which ones do you wish that you'd used? You can try out names on us if you want to and see if we know how to say them and if we like the feel of them and the sound of them. Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to have a look at those other videos on characters to see if they help you, and there's the one on mind maps that you might find useful too. Okay, so good luck with your writing.